Very good. Welcome everybody to this presentation. Do you want me to get started, Anna, or did you want to say anything?
Yes, I prefer to say anything, Elisabeth. Thank you so much. So thank you very much, Elisabeth, and thank you everybody for being with us today. My name is Anna, and I'm the education manager in Inventis. It is a real pleasure for me and for Inventis Academia to have all of you here today for this workshop on real ear measurements organized by Inventis, but owner and Indiana. Elisabeth, entrepreneur and leader with your career, she has developed products and businesses that improve hearing health and wellness through state-of-the-art ear technologies. Thank you very much, Elisabeth, for accepting our invitation. Title of the workshop, Let's Get Real About Outcome Measures, Practice Solution for Evaluating Success. The goal of this course is not only to deliver practical solution that you can integrate into your office today, but also expand your thinking about ways to use real ear in your practice. I invite all of you to write down any questions in the space provided that you should see on the screen. Elisabeth will answer the questions during the event, not only at the end of the webinar. Keep in mind that your contribution is fundamental to expand the borders of academia. So after the event, you'll receive a survey I kindly ask you to fill out. The survey will help us to understand your needs, to get your ideas in order to provide the best educational support ever. Elisabeth, it's your turn now. Enjoy the webinar and thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks everybody for attending today. My name is Elisabeth Thompson. I'm an audiologist here in the United States and the owner of Hickory Audiology, as Anna mentioned. I am passionate about real ear measures, and I applaud all of you for taking some time out of your day to have a discussion about how we can evaluate the outcomes of our patients' success with real ear measures. Here's the agenda of what we're going to do today. We're going to start with an introduction. We're going to talk about the importance of real ear measures and really setting up success with the equipment and the scheduling. Then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how do we evaluate hearing aid functions in real ear fittings. And then the last of the presentation, we want to take you kind of beyond the hearing aid and think about ways that we can use verification measures kind of outside of the box. And hopefully I'll expand your thinking on how we use verification measures within our practice. After the course, participants should be able to describe the benefits of real ear measures, be able to describe the benefits of real ear measures to your patient and to your practice, and be able to implement real ear measures for non-traditional hearing aid products that we'll talk about at the end. So a little bit about me, disclosures. I am the founder and owner of a private practice here in Bloomington, Indiana, Hickory Audiology, and I have no financial disclosures to report. So a little bit about me. I have been an audiologist for 20 plus years and graduated from Indiana University here in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm very proud Hoosier and was born and raised in Indiana and actually went to work at IU after I graduated with my master's in audiology. After a couple years of clinical practice, Phonak actually called and said, hey, would you want to come work for us? And I was happily and proud to serve as the outside sales and trainer for the VA system within Phonak for a number of years, and then transitioned inside to more product management, product development. You know, really, of course, I had done real ear measures in my clinical practice at IU and in my clinical work, but really at Phonak is where I really started to develop a passion for real ear measures. So much of my time was spent teaching and helping audiologists in the VA system with implementing real ear measures for the evaluation of their phonak fittings. And that's really where I got my passion for implementing real ear solutions. I did a lot of teaching as a trainer at Phonak and taught a lot about how to use VA or how to use real ear measures to evaluate those products. I then went to Lantos, which is a relatively new company that had been on the market developing real ear scanning equipment. And during the height of COVID, things shifted at Lantos, and I had always talked about opening a private practice, but hadn't done it yet. And so during the height of COVID, I think we all were like, what are we waiting for? Let's do it. Like, let's do it now. So my husband looked at me one day and was like, okay, it's time. It's time to open your private practice. So we opened Hickory Audiology a little over a year ago and have just had the best time seeing the products that I have fit over and helped develop over the years come to life with my patient fittings and be able to help patients day in and day out in our practice. So let's talk about verification methods. You know, for all of us that are working clinically, certainly we see patients every day and we're fitting hearing aids day in and day out. And I usually, if we were live in person, I would ask the room who implements verification in their practice. And inevitably, you know, somewhere between 30 and 70% of the room would raise their hand. And I would attest that everybody who does any kind of hearing aid fitting is doing some form of verification method in their practice. The may change which one we do, but we're all doing some form of verification method. Whether it's patient self-report, the how does that sound method, or functional gain measures going back into the sound booth, or real ear measures, which have really become the gold standard for verifying patient fittings. And we're going to talk about each one of these. So let's talk about that patient self-report method of verification. We have all asked a patient, how does that sound? Right? How does my voice sound? How does your voice sound? Those are methods of verification with your patient. We're seeing, does the patient respond in a favorable or unfavorable way to a certain sound stimulus? Certainly, this is the most widely used for adult fittings, but the challenge with this verification method is we really don't have any idea of how much gain or amplification is going on at in that patient's ear, at that tympanic membrane, how much SPL is actually being driven down through there. We have no indication of MPO except to have the patient tell us it's too loud for them. And it's really hard for us we're relying completely on the manufacturer software to be able to show the true gain values of the device. So we don't know if the hearing aid's working as well as it could for that patient in that particular ear. But it's still, we do it every day. Every patient I see, I ask them, hey, how's that sound? Another verification method that has been used widely over the years is functional gain. So putting a patient back into a booth and then measuring those thresholds. You know, I would say this was a method of verification that was easier 20 years ago when I started in audiology versus what it is today. Because the hearing aids are so sophisticated and being able to react to sound in a different way depending on the input, it's really hard to do functional gain measures in the booth. Now, still something you can do if you don't have any other way to do it, throw a person in the sound booth and do some sound field testing to see how they're doing with the hearing aid in place. I would say we don't see this very often anymore, so I'm going to breeze right through it. The verification method that we want to spend the most of the time talking about today is real ear measures. So this is the ability to measure the SPL in the ear canal for that particular patient. So we're going to be able to tell exactly how much gain or amplification the hearing aid is providing in that particular ear with that particular ear's ear canal resonance. We'll also be able to assess the MPO, the max power out, and ensure that this patient has comfort for their fitting. You can evaluate to a target, so we can use a prescriptive target that we can say, hey, does this hearing aid match that prescriptive target or not? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about targets. You can also evaluate specific hearing aid features. We won't go into this a ton today, but certainly once you get into verification measures, you're going to, I'm always trying to think about, how can I measure noise reduction for that sophisticated hearing aid versus maybe an entry-level hearing aid. And it's very easy to evaluate at multiple input levels. When you're working in a sound booth and doing like verification through sound field testing, it takes a lot of time to evaluate each pitch at various levels. But with Real Ear, you can do multiple different levels at the same time. Let me pull up the questions here. I'm just going to pull up the questions box just in case anybody has any questions. Feel free to throw them in the questions and I will try to answer them as I see them come in. Perfect. So why do we need to do verification? Hopefully you enjoy my picture. It's not October, but I loved this picture of this dog in kind of in a ghost costume, because I feel sometimes without verification, that's how I feel about my patients. They're kind of hidden behind something. And my job is to try to figure out what the heck is going on in that patient's real ear canal. So for me, verification has become my gold standard of practice because I want to know what's going on for that particular patient with that patient's particular ear canal resonance. I want to assure that you have audibility for soft and average sounds. So soft inputs, like let's say a 50 dB SPL input, and average sounds a 65 dB SPL input. Oh, perfect. Okay, the conversation is cutting out. I guess I'm going to try to talk a little bit more slowly, which is hard for me to do. I'm a fast talker. Sorry about that. But I will try to slow down a little bit. We also want to assure that the uncomfortable loudness levels are not exceeded. So whether it's an estimated or a measured UCL, we want to make sure that the patient's not uncomfortable with the amount of sound that's being carried across into the ear. It also allows for, like I mentioned, that independent verification of hearing aid functions. So is noise reduction working in the hearing aid? Is any kind of frequency compression working in the hearing aid? We can use our verification equipment to really verify, are the functions doing, is the hearing aid doing what we said it's doing? The final reason why do verification, our patients are human. They have real ear canals, and all of our ear canal resonance is different. And so you may have a person who has a very, very tiny ear, and their ear canal resonance is going to be quite different than a patient who has a really big ear. Okay. So what is the benefit of integrating real ear measures into your practice? For me, first and foremost, the benefit for patients is time. And this is also the thing that a lot of people say, this is why we can't implement real ear measures into my practice, because I don't have time. I'm already full. My patient appointment is already full with what I have to tell them, especially if we're trying to do any kind of app pairing and working with their phones. Our time in our patient appointments, it has gotten crunched as more features have come into the hearing aid. But I would attest that the time spent on real ear measures, which is not very long, a couple minutes, once you get the hang of it, the time spent on real ear measures will prove dividends towards the patient, overall patient fitting. There have been reports in the US documenting that the number of patient follow-up visits is reduced for those practices that implement real ear measures into their practice. You can also reduce the amount of fine-tuning for those patients, and we all know who those patients are, right? Those ones that are fiddlers, that are trying to really figure out, exactly how to get the most out of their hearing aids. I find that real ear measures can greatly reduce the amount of time I spend with them because they trust that the hearing aid is working the way it should. Value in getting it right the first time. You know, for patients, if we can get a good hearing aid fitting done at the time of at that first appointment, we nail their features and their settings, that patient has a lot of confidence in you, and that creates value in your services to be able to offer for that patient. I'm going to read a couple questions here. Patients, chargeable hearing aids really come for follow-up as they don't need batteries. So patients with rechargeable hearing aids don't come for follow-up is one of the things that somebody mentioned because they're not needing batteries. You know, in our practice, we see our patients every 6 months so that we can clean out their filters, and also we also condition the hearing aids using that Redux system to get out the moisture. So I would highly recommend, in my practice, my patients are seen every 6 months regardless. What I have found for patients who I don't do verification on, I'm seeing them more for fine tuning and follow-up. One of the other benefits for integrating real ear measures is patient satisfaction. I find that patients are much more trusting of their fitting when they can see, yes, that fitting does what the hearing aid does, what it's been prescribed to do. The hearing aid is giving me the benefit that I need in that ear. And finally, this is something they can't get online, right? So if patients are thinking about purchasing online or doing an over-the-counter type hearing aid, I applaud that and applaud over-the-counter hearing aids. I think there's a place for it in our field, but certainly for those that have a hearing loss that require services and the care of a hearing care professional, this is something they can't get online. So we've got a couple questions coming here. I'm just going to read through those really quickly. What can be done at a point you have inputted in the hearing aid? So what can be done at point you have the ear measured through a hearing test with an audiogram, and at the point of the same fitting measurement was inputted into a hearing aid, but the patient complained of speech not being clear. So if a patient is complaining about kind of speech not being clear and you've inputted everything into the software, I would absolutely do verification for that patient and make sure that the hearing aid fittings, that all those measures are appropriate for them, that they're getting all of that speech input that we need. Yeah. How often are we expected to do reprogramming was another that's a good question. You know, for me in my practice, I'm going to reprogram the patient's hearing aid anytime that there's a change in hearing. So we do an annual hearing test. If the patient reports that they've had a shift in hearing, we'll reprogram the hearing aids then. And then if the patient says something's not, you know, that their performance has changed, certainly we'll evaluate it. And then, can I come to your office in Indiana? Absolutely. Come anytime. My office is Hickory Audiology, and we would be happy to host you anytime. You know, one of the other things that we hear a lot is real ear measures have become clinical best practices, and this has been said for a long, long time, but definitely is gaining steam. And the AAA, the American Academy of Audiology here in the United States, has recommended verification in real ear practices or real ear measures as a best practice for years. But all too often, sometimes people would not implement them into their practice. And there was a whole lot of reasons why. But you know what? It's becoming more and more the standard of care for real ear measures to be implemented. And I have to give credit also to Dr. Cliff. So if anybody has watched any of the Dr. Cliff videos and the YouTube channel, you know what? Dr. Cliff really reached out to consumers and said, hey, you should expect real ear measures to be performed as part of your hearing aid fitting. And so if you do a quick search of the internet, you're going to find video after video from Dr. Cliff and others on integrating real ear measures into their practice. Very good. So what are real ear measures? It is a valid and repeatable, reliable method for assessing the sound level in dB/SPL within 3 to 5 millimeters of the tympanic membrane. So you're actually going to place a probe down into the ear, and it's going to measure how much dB/SPL is at that probe. Why are they performed? I think I've belabored this already, but to check the hearing aid performance while it's being worn and to ensure that the hearing aid outputs are audible and comfortable for the patient. So here's the necessary equipment that you're going to need to perform real ear measures. So you need a real ear system. And the one that we're going to talk about today and that I'm using in my practice is the Inventus trumpet. So it needs a speaker. So something that is going to output the sound, a probe mic that is placed within 3 to 5 millimeters from the eardrum, a reference microphone that's going to be placed right under the pinna. So you can see that little blue kind of box right under there. That has a microphone right there that's going to measure that sound as it's coming in. And then you need a hearing aid. And depending on what mode the hearing aid is in will determine what measurement we're taking. If it's not inserted and we're just measuring an unaided ear, so an ear without a hearing aid in it, that would be an unaided measure. If the hearing aid is in their ear but turned off, it's going to be an occluded measurement, aka the hearing aid is in, it's occluding the ear, but it's not actually any sound going through it. Or if it's inserted and turned, that should say turned on, not off. So we'll fix that in the slides. If it's inserted and turned on, it would be an aided measure. Very good. Perfect. So there's what that system would look like. Let me look through. There's a couple questions. Perfect. I'm just looking through the questions. Yes. Okay. So here's a look at the Inventus trumpet system. So it's got the speaker kind of right in the middle of that device. And then they have their module. So I'm actually going to grab mine right here. They have this in a wired and a wireless system. Wireless, yay. What all audiologists want to have is things that are wireless. So they have a wireless system so you're not tethered to the speaker, and a wired system. The wireless system is the one I use in my practice. So that free field speaker is going to produce a sound, and that sound will be picked up by the reference microphone and the probe microphone. So the hearing or the system knows the difference between what's picked up at the probe mic versus what's picked up at the reference mic. And that's how it does its measurements. So a little bit about the office setup. One of the things that I focus on my practice is really using verification and real ear measures for education with the patient, for counseling with the patient, and to make sure that the hearing aids are working the way I want them to work. So I think it's very important that the patient can see what's going on with the real ear measures. So I took a very bad picture of one of my office in one of our counseling rooms or fitting rooms. So I use two 24-inch monitors that are stacked on top of each other, and that way I can put the screen and I just have it screen extended, and I can put the Maestro software up on that top screen so that the patient can see that. And then the bottom screen I have where I can do my work. Other folks will have like a monitor on their desk, and then on the like a back wall, a large TV monitor with the the Inventus Maestro software up as well. So whatever kind of setup works for your practice, but we just want to make sure that the patient can see what's going on. So I don't have this set up as a poll question, but I'm going to let you, I think the chat is open and available. So I'm going to give people just a couple of seconds to write in the chat, what scenarios are you using real ear measures into your practice? Are you using them for new fittings, for follow-up fittings, for hearing aid checks, hearing aid problems, OTC hearing aids, or do you never use them? I'm going to give you a couple seconds to type in the chat there, if that's open and available. New fittings, never use them. Okay. Very hearing aid problems, love that. New fittings, all of the above. Perfect. Thanks guys for the input. So it's great to see that people are using this kind of all over the place. I use it for all of those things. So for new fittings, for follow-up fittings, 3 to 6 month hearing aid checks, depending on if I'm doing any reprogramming, I will absolutely use them. And we'll talk at the end about for locked or over-the-counter hearing aids, definitely a use in my clinic. Thanks for all the input. I really appreciate that. Whoops. Let me get back to the right screen here. So let's talk a little bit about scheduling those patients. You know, at my clinic, for all previous users, I'm going to do verification at the time of the hearing aid fitting, at that initial fitting. For some of my patients, though, that are not previous users of technology, I will wait and do the verification at the 2-week check appointment. Oftentimes, what I find is that patients, for a new user, that the target level is not quite, we're not quite ready to turn them up to total audibility or 100% target at that time of fitting. And so oftentimes I'll set that patient at like 85 or 90% and then let an auto acclimatization software that's available in some of the Sonova products work, or some of the other manufacturers have the same kind of feature, which will turn the hearing aid up over the course of the next 2 weeks. And we're going to talk a little bit about fitting to target versus fitting to audibility as well as we get kind of into this a little bit. For follow-up fittings, I absolutely am using verification. Like I said, once you get good at this, it only takes a couple minutes to do, to pull up the software and implement that. It doesn't take very long. Anytime there's a change in hearing, I will, and I'm adjusting the hearing aids for that change in hearing, I'm going to do verification measures. You can also use this to evaluate the performance of a device over time. So if you don't have a test box where you're testing the hearing aids in a simulated environment, you can use verification to say, hey, is the hearing aid performing as well as it used to? If not, we need to fix it. Either change a receiver, change a filter, or send it in. And you can definitely use it to troubleshoot hearing aid problems. Like, is there noise in it? You're going to be able to see that noise in the verification. So the setup for this. So I think there's been some comments in the questions of, hey, can you do a live demo? I'm not going to go through a live demo today just because I don't have anybody else in the room to do it on. But there are tons of videos available on the Inventus YouTube channel. I would highly, highly encourage those of you who are considering the Inventus trumpet or who are just interested in verification measures in general to visit the YouTube page of Inventus. They've got great videos there that are going to be able to walk you through exactly how to calibrate, how to equalize, and place the probe tube. So equalize, what we need to do is equalize the reference mics on the patient. So you're going to set the patient within about 1 meter of the base station, and then equalize the wireless or wired system. So what that's doing is setting the reference mic. So it's saying, hey, how far away is the reference, or what does the environment look like, and to set that reference mic. And then you're going to calibrate the probe tube. To calibrate the probe tube, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this on the camera, but you simply place the probe down on the device like that, hang it on their ear, and hit calibrate. And you can calibrate both the right and the left probe at the same time, which is a time saver. Hallelujah. Then you're going to place that probe down in the ear canal. You can measure. There's actually a little measuring tool on the side of the Inventis system that you can measure for average canal length based on what you see in the patient's ear canal, and then can place it. There's actually a little black marker on the tube you can use to slide up and down as an estimated. And then you're going to place that into the ear. I usually tell the patient you're going to feel a little tickle. Shouldn't hurt. For some patients, you can, if you could bump their eardrum, and I would recommend bumping your own eardrum, just so you know what it feels like. It just feels like a little thump on the ear. It doesn't hurt, but it just feels a little odd if you do that. You certainly do not need to bump their eardrums when placing that probe tube, but you do want to get about 3 to 5 millimeters from the eardrum. Then you're going to select the test that's most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get an unaided response, an aided response, or a live speech mapping response? Okay, so let's get into this here. So we'll talk about the importance of probe tube placement. So this is the Inventis screen. So this is what you're going to see in the Maestro software when you bring it up. So we're looking at an unaided condition, which I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you're going to see that right at the top in orange is going to tell you what test, what mode you're doing. So we're in an unaided condition. We're using a 70 dB SPL input and pink noise, and the system has already been calibrated. So this is that probe tube being placed down in the ear canal, and you can see my ear canal, or the ear canal resonance of this patient. And so that's showing you, and what I recommend you do with whatever real ear system that you're using, do an unaided response and just play with how deep or shallow you place that probe tube, and you're going to see that response move and change. So as you're getting comfortable with real ear, play around with it and see what happens when you have a shallow placement versus what happens when you really get it down in there good within 3 to 5 millimeters of the drum. The other thing that I look at when I'm doing an unaided measure for the patient is, do they look similar? Our ears can be different shapes and sizes from right to left, but I don't typically find that people have massive differences between their right and their left ear. With the exception, one exception to that is if you have a surgical ear. A surgical ear, you definitely want to measure an unaided condition, because that can be very different in that surgical ear. Perfect. Okay, so this is showing you, this is on that left ear, you can see we had kind of a shallow response on that left ear. The probe tube wasn't quite in there deep enough. Now when I place the probe tube actually nice and deep in the ear canal, I see a pretty similar response to the right and the left in that unaided condition. So there's a lot of acronyms in audiology in general, but there are a lot of acronyms in verification. So when we're talking about real ear measures, you're typically going to see things like REAG, REOG, REUG, REAR, REOR, REUR. So let's break that down for you. RE just stands for real ear. So that means that those measurements were acquired on a patient. The U, O, and A stand for unaided, occluded, or aided. So unaided, open ear, no device in the ear, Occluded is going to be a device in the ear but turned off, and then aided, a device in the ear and turned on. And then the final letter to that acronym is either a response or it's in gain. So a real ear aided response would be a real ear measure with an aided ear, and you're measuring the value at the probe, the actual SPL in the ear canal, versus real ear aided gain, REAG. Gain is going to be the difference between the probe and the reference mic. So that's the impact. What is the impact of that aided condition in the ear? So real ear aided gain is going to give you the impact. Real ear aided response is going to give you the actual dB SPL level. Let's take a little break and look at the questions. There's been a lot coming in, so give me just a second and I'll give you your ears a break. So some of these we're going to get to. Patients debating on how. One person, I wanted to mention this also for evaluating current hearing aids, especially if a patient is debating a new purchase or a continued use of an old hearing aid. This is an excellent point. You can really use this as a counseling tool, and we're going to get to that just a little bit later on. Perfect. Okay. I think we're good on some of the questions we're going to get to here in a little bit later on. Okay. So let's look back at this screen. And so we had mentioned the unaided, occluded, and aided condition, and you're going to see that right across the top of the Inventus software. So they have the unaided, occluded, or aided condition. One of the things I like about the Maestro software is everything is on the screen. Everything is right here. I just need to figure out which button to press. So if I'm doing an unaided response, I go to unaided. Occluded, aided, right there at the top, I can select what condition I want. Over on the right-hand side, I can select, do I want this to be shown in SPL or HL? Now, for audiograms, we're used to looking at things in HL. For real ear equipment, we typically look at things in SPL. It's up to you though. You can look in things in SPL or HL. It's your party. You know, you can figure out how do you want to look at those things. And then do you want to look at it as aided or response or gain is right there in that upper right-hand corner. So let's look at an unaided measure. So you can measure an unaided response. So this is putting a probe mic, down into that ear and measure unaided, or you can use predicted. It's totally up to you. My preference is to go ahead and take the measurement. You're in there anyway, and you're going to put a hearing aid in next. So why not go ahead and grab an unaided measure? However, you can use predicted unaided response as well. And it'll just show over on the right-hand side where it says REUG predicted or measured. It'll show on that right-hand side for you. Perfect. Oh, one other thing I did want to mention here, if you, like I had mentioned before, if you have a surgical ear or an ear that's particularly misshapen, definitely do measured responses. Predicted responses are going to be based on an average ear. So if it's a surgical ear, for sure, we want to do a measured response. Now let's look at an aided response. There are all kinds of stimulus that we can use. Pink noise, white noise, the ISTS or ICRA noise, or that rainbow passage can be used. I tend to use the ISTS, which is, I think, for International Speech Standard something. I don't remember what ISTS stands for, but you can Google it. I use that stimulus most often because it's a fast response and it gives a nice frequency response that you can see. ICRA though is fantastic as well, or you can do the rainbow passage. So let's look at an aided response measure. So this is in the section of how are we evaluating the hearing aid. So for me, I'm going to do an ISTS response at 3 different input levels. I want to do 50, 65, and 80. So 50 dB SPL, 65, and 80. I want to see how does the patient respond to soft speech, how does the hearing aid respond to average speech, and how does it respond to loud speech. Trying to achieve that is soft and medium speech audible and loud speech tolerable for the patient. Now, in the aided condition, you can choose to select a fitting rule target to follow. So a little bit of the lay of the land here. So we have frequency along the bottom, SPL, this is an SPLogram, so SPL up the side. We have the hearing thresholds are seen in SPL for that patient. So this patient has relatively normal hearing in the low pitches to a high frequency sensory neural hearing loss in the high pitches. The green is the response for 50, purple is the response for 65, and orange is the response to 80. The dashed lines are the targets, and the solid lines are the actual SPL being measured by that patient's ear. And I'm looking at this, make sure. So this is response. So this is an REAR, so a real ear aided response, not gain, okay? And so what we see here, first and foremost, is that this patient is being a little underfit at the moment compared to target. So those thresholds just aren't quite up above what I would like them to be. They're a little underfitting to the target. So the solid line is below the dotted line. Also, what I see is that the solid line isn't really above the thresholds for soft speech. And even for 65, we're not above the thresholds. They're at 2,000 and 3,000 hertz. So this was a patient that was fit to a manufacturer's software. So we're fitting 100% to target gain, and it's just not quite getting there. So even though it's at 100% of what the manufacturer recommended, in this patient's particular ear, it's not loud enough to get adequate audibility for that patient. So what do? You go to the manufacturer software. So in this case, it was a Phonak fitting. One of the things that I really like about Maestro is that you do have an on-top mode for the verification. So if you only have one screen in your office, you can go on top and you're going to see your real ear on top of your fitting software, and you can make adjustments while the real ear is running and be able to see when you've done enough, which is fantastic. So that's what I did in this case. I made some adjustments to that patient, and this is the after effect. So as you can see now, my patient has audibility for medium sounds for 65 dB input throughout the frequency range through 4,000 hertz, and has met targets as well. So if I hadn't done verification, I wouldn't know, hey, this was a little underfit. And my patient may have come back and said, I'm not hearing people as well as I want to. I'm not getting the sound quality that I thought I would get out of these hearing aids because I was a little underfit. Okay. So in my view, you save the patient some time, and you're a better fitting because of that real ear measures. You can also do an MPO sweep. So this is a max power out. So this is just a sweep that's ensuring at a loud level, ensuring that the patient, that things aren't too loud for them. So how do we evaluate the goodness of a fit? This has been kind of the great debate in hearing aid practices. Do I fit to target, or do I fit to intelligibility? And there's kind of two camps of thought on this. One is that matching to target is kind of the tried and true. DSL, NAL, NL2 are there. In my view, sometimes I do have struggle with patients' acceptance of fitting to a target. Sometimes it's just seen as too darn loud for that patient. So the other hand of target fitting is audibility fitting, where I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to make sure that my patient has audibility for soft sounds, that medium sounds, 65 dB, are comfortable for them, and that they're able to tolerate loud sounds. So I kind of use an ACT method: audibility for soft, comfort for medium sounds, and tolerability, tolerable for loud. I don't think I'm in either camp where I always do target matching or I always do audibility. For me, it's about looking at that particular case and seeing what's best for the patient. Ideally, I want to get targets as much as possible, but if that's not possible for the patient, I will fit to audibility for them. Another concept I want to talk to you about that's available within the Inventus software is the Speech Intelligibility Index. And there's a lot of words on the screen that I'm not going to read to you. But the Speech Intelligibility Index is a fantastic tool that tells us what is the predicted speech intelligibility for that patient based on the audibility we provided. And what the SII does is focuses on the speech frequencies. So it gives more weighting to that mid to high frequency speech information where we get all of our intelligibility of speech. And you're gonna, I think, have a copy of these slides. If not, let me know and I can send you that as well. I'll have my email address at the end of the talk. So how good is good enough? So this speech intelligibility index allows us to say, okay, based on the amount of speech information that we make intelligible to that patient, how would we predict their performance on closed set words or open set words like in NU6 or on speech sentences or IEEE sentences? So how you do this is that you look at the speech intelligibility index, which is calculated for you in the Maestro software, and then say, okay, with that speech intelligibility index or with that SII percentage, you go up and you say, where does it cross the curved line? And then go over, and that'll give you the percent correct predicted. So in this example, a 70% SII for NU6 words would predict that patient would hear and understand 98% or 88% of those words correctly. On sentences, that patient would get 99% of those sentences correct. So you can see from like that slope of that curve, because of the redundancy in speech, small changes in speech intelligibility yield huge benefits for the patients. And some would say if you're trying to get kind of once you've crossed the curve, once you've kind of gotten over the hump, additional speech intelligibility doesn't really yield all that positive of a result. So I gave you the example here of that patient fitting that we just went through. And where from the first fit recommendations, the speech intelligibility index for soft speech for the patient was 29. So based on that, we would expect for sentences, the patient would have gotten about 35% of sentences correct, aided 35% correct. And for IEEE sentences, about 50–60% correct. However, once we made our adjustments, that SII rose to 38. So now on those IEEE sentences, we would expect the patient to get 80+% of those words correct. So I give you that example to say, pay attention to the SII that you're achieving. And I have this chart actually printed off and right by my counseling computer so that I can show the patient, here's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to get you to a speech intelligibility index that is going to yield meaningful results for you to be able to achieve what you're trying to get from your fitting. If you want more information about the Speech Intelligibility Index, Anna at Inventus actually just did an Audiology Online post on this. That was fantastic. So I would highly recommend you reading that. I'm going to kind of move past this because I know we're kind of running on time. So what is the best hearing aid is a question that I get all the time from people, from my patients, from my colleagues. what is the best hearing aid? And I had a professor long ago told me the best hearing aid is the one that people will wear. So as much as I promote verification real ear measures, we also have to be reasonable that sometimes patients don't want it that loud. And so we have to back down the gain to make it appropriate for that patient. So the best hearing aid, in my opinion, is the one that people will wear. In our last 10 minutes or so together, talk about some additional features that are available through the Inventus software. One is live speech mapping. So live speech mapping is a fantastic tool that you can use. For the live speech mapping, you can turn on an input like the rainbow passage, or I'm going to give you the list of all the inputs you can use. Or you can actually just turn on it live, so it just records the information that's coming in naturally into the room. So you can use live speech mapping versus a real ear aided response to evaluate audibility for that patient. So this is that same patient that we saw before, where we see the dotted line as the unaided response and the solid line as the aided response. So for a 65 dB input, we see that those sounds are all audible to this patient. And you can do that same method that we did for the real ear aided response, a 50 dB, 65 dB, and 80 dB input, and see. I personally find the live speech mapping is a little messier to explain to patients, so I use aided response for evaluating goodness of fit. But I love live speech input to be able to turn on that live and use it for the very specific case of when you have that patient come in who says, I can hear everybody except my wife. I can hear everybody except my daughter, right? And if they have that loved one with them, which I highly recommend that they bring, I'll turn on live speech and let's have the wife talk. And we can evaluate that live speech. Whoops, I'm going to go back one and have that just turn on live. I guess I didn't take a screenshot of that. Turn on live, let that patient's wife talk and use it as a counseling tool to be able to say, yeah, you really are struggling to hear her voice. Let me make some adjustments to the hearing aid. Or you can say, ma'am, I need you to talk a little louder for your spouse. He needs you to talk a little louder for him because he's struggling to hear you, and I need to help. You can help that patient kind of use more breath support to amplify their voice. I also will turn on live speech and walk away from the patient with my back turned and have both patient and wife see, gosh, that makes a big impact on the ability of the hearing aids to pick up that voice. So I use live speech very much as a counseling tool for that patient. There's lots of different stimulus that you can have in that live speech input. One of my favorite, this actually just happened to a patient last week who is an ornithologist. He's a birder. So he actually goes throughout the country and takes people on hikes to identify rare birds at different parts of the country. And he unfortunately has a big high frequency hearing loss. And so we were able to do the bird chirp one. And the green is a bird chirp at 60 dB. And the green response was when he walked in with his hearing aids, what he was hearing. The orange is the response when he walked out after I made some adjustments. So he was telling me, I'm struggling to hear the birds. And I'm like, well, let's see. So I turned on a bird chirp through the Inventus software, and I was like, yeah, you're not hearing that bird chirp at 4,000 hertz. Let's see what we can do about it. And so made some adjustments to the hearing aid, and boom, now it's above that line so the patient can hear that bird chirping. And he was super happy. One of the other features I love in the Inventus software is you can show distance from target. So when somebody says, well, is that good or not good? Even you, if you're questioning, is that a good fit or not a good fit? You can use distance from target, which is right over on the right-hand side of the screen. You can click that on, and it's going to shade the area where you're underperforming to target. And so this fitting is phenomenal, right? So we're seeing that we're really not that far off except for 8,000 hertz from the target. So that explaining that to the patient to say like, okay, we're going to show this distance from target and we're going to see how good this fit is. And when they see that they're right on top of it, there's not a lot of graded area showing, they're like, oh, these are really good hearing aids. You've done a really good job. And that's what we want. We want the patient to entrust in you as the professional, and we want them to believe that their hearing aids are the best fit for them. So I've got 5 minutes left, and I really want to hit this topic. I want to talk about what do we do with hearing aids that are locked so that you can't do any kind of frequency shaping or adjustments to the hearing aid, or some of the over-the-counter products. And I hear audiologists kind of start to think about how they're going to implement over-the-counter products here in the United States into their practice or deal with hearing aids that are locked. And some of them kind of throw their hands up and say, well, there's nothing I can do with it, right? I can't do anything with that product, so I'm not going to see that patient. And I kind of go the opposite direction. I'm like, bring them on. Come on in. If you've got an over-the-counter hearing aid or a hearing aid that's locked, come on in. Let's see how it's responding for you. So you can use this over-the-counter device you can evaluate how the device is doing. So for some of these over-the-counter devices that are pure amplifiers, they're really not giving them much high frequency gain. And you can show that to a patient. It's not me telling a patient it's not doing you any good or not doing you what you need it to do. It's showing them. Or for some of the OTC devices that have adjustments in the app, we can guide the patient through making some of those adjustments in the app. Now, inevitably, a question that I'll get is, do I charge for my time for this? Absolutely. So my time is valuable. This is not a service that I'm providing for these patients for free. We are an unbundled practice, and so I am billing for my services to the patient if they're, to be able to provide this service to them. So I'm getting my value is being recognized for them. Any patient I have ever done this with has become a lifelong patient of our practice. I believe they're going to be a lifelong patient of our practice. Our practice has only been open for a year, so not lifelong yet. But these patients, you're showing them a level of care that they're not getting on the internet. You're showing them a level of care that they're not getting everywhere else in town. And so I put this picture of my dog with a cone on his head because I feel like our dog is fantastic, but he makes the best of every situation there is. And so if we have a patient that has an over-the-counter hearing aid or a locked hearing aid, make the best of the situation. Evaluate that patient and then figure out how to make either that device work best for them or convince them that another device may be more appropriate. In talking about this over-the-counter, I wanted to use the example of AirPods. So if y'all have been watching some of the Apple releases that have been happening, AirPods now have the ability to have a headphone accommodation within them. And so I use the same hearing loss that we've been talking about, and this patient actually had AirPods, and she, they have hearing aids now, but for doing conference calls and things, she still was planning on using some of her AirPods some of the time. And so I'm like, well, how are those working for you? And, the response was, they do pretty good, except I don't feel like I always understand people when I'm using my AirPods. I'm like, great, let's see what they're doing. So I turned on live speech and just played some music actually through her phone to simulate a conference call. And what we see here is that the aided response, so the response with the AirPod in place, that person was not getting anything above 1500 hertz. So we were relying solely on 500 or 250 to 500 hertz for her to be able to understand speech. Now, AirPods do have an accommodation. So I'm like, well, let's do it. So in the AirPod, you can actually enter the audiogram and provide headphone accommodations with the audiogram in place. So the purple line is the aided response with the headphone accommodations turned on for that patient. And what we see is that we got them in the left ear, audibility through 3000 hertz by turning on those headphone accommodations for the patient. Is it as good as hearing aids? Absolutely not. Not as good as her hearing aids, but it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. And so we were able to give quite a bit of that aided benefit to that patient by turning on the headphone accommodations. So I want you to think outside the box, right? Think about how you can use verification to give patients confidence in their products, to push those patients that need a little bit more gain out of their hearing aid. And as somebody mentioned of why they use verification, to upgrade patients. For patients that have older technology or that are 3 to 5 years old and they're considering new technology, do verification. See what the hearing aid's doing for them. And if it's not doing enough, it's time to talk about an upgrade. In my practice, I see the financial impact of verification all the time, that it can help convert new patients. It can help convert patients that hearing aids are more than 5 years old. It can reduce the number of return visits to your practice, so kind of increase your profitability by not having your schedule be clogged with return patients, and the return for credit rate. We have an incredibly low return for credit rate here at my practice, and I think one of the driving forces of this is verification. We're doing verification on every patient, and our return for credit rate is darn near nil. Okay, so we are right at time. There are a couple questions. I just want to kind of get through it. Real ear is the best. I agree. Thanks for an interesting presentation. Thank you for that. Very good, very good. I don't see any. One question, how can molds be selected with hearing loss in terms of vent? I think that's a great question, probably for a different talk on this. I think you absolutely can use verification to play around with different venting for a patient and see the impact of different venting of either open domes versus closed domes. We could do a whole talk on that, and it would be great. I hope one of the things that we've talked about today is just kind of opening your mind to a lot of the questions that we have about the performance of a hearing aid in an ear can be measured through verification. It's just opening your mind up to say like, hey, well, let's give it a shot. And I am the first one with my patients to be like, I don't know, but let's figure it out. And let's find out how to make that question be answered for them. The final thing I'm going to leave you with is this quote that I love. The world hates change, but it's the only thing that has brought progress. This is a quote by Charles Kettering from Delco, who is a CEO and a brilliant man. And I know it's hard to change your clinical practice, to change the way you've been doing things for years, but yet that growth that we get from professional development and trying new things is the only thing that's going to bring progress to our patients and progress to our practice. And so thank you guys all so much for your time and attention today. For those that asked about my email address, it is right there. It's super easy. It's Elisabeth@hickoryaudiology.com. And I would encourage all of you to, if you're not doing verification in your practice now, think about joining the verification movement. And good luck with all of your patient fittings. Thanks so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Elisabeth. You are great. So verification achieves more than correct gain and output. Okay, keep in mind. I truly hope you all enjoy this fantastic learning opportunity, and I really hope, Elisabeth, can you make yourself available for future events we would like to organize, because it would be a great pleasure for Inventis to have you as speakers.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. Thank you. So the course is over, but Inventis Academia doesn't stop. Please keep checking Inventis social pages and register for future events promoted by Inventis Academia. We are preparing very interesting webinars, insights, and workshops, both on fitting and balance. You'll receive soon a survey I kindly ask you to fill out. The survey will help us to understand your needs and your suggestions. So thanks again and see you soon. Thank you, Elisabeth, once again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.